And welcome back to the Eighth Day Coaching Podcast. This is the second part of this particular mini-series within Catholic Single and Flourishing. Arleen Spenceley once again joins me. Say hi, Arleen.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And I'm very excited to do the second part here and just get your perspective on some of the thoughts that I've been thinking about in my own brain. Just to reintroduce this mini-series here, what we're talking about are three things that single women and single men want each other to know. In the previous episode, Arleen shared a little bit about her perspective of what women want men to know. And in this episode, I'm going to share what men want women to know. And the whole reason behind this is that what I found just doing research as I was preparing for Catholic Single and Flourishing, this particular series, is that a lot of times as men, as women, we all have a sort of narrow focus. We only live in our world, and we don't really see what each other are seeing. And that's why I thought having this dialogue between men and women would really open things up and allow us to kind of understand one another in a different way. So I want to encourage you, whether you're a man or a woman, to check out that previous episode that we did of the three things that women want men to know about dating, because I think it just provides a lot of insight of what we all really want the other to know. And coming to this particular episode, this is three things single men want women to know about dating. I have my own talking points here, and Arleen's going to help me just with the conversation. She's going to be asking me questions and providing insight from her own experience, because I think this dialogue can be very helpful for all of us. The first point that I have for all of you is, for women in particular, is make it easy for men to ask you out. Now, different women have different temperaments and different personalities, and this may come more natural to some women than others, but I know this just from my own experience, that I could go to an event and certain women will be more open to having a conversation, just a conversation, than others. I like to share this story. I went to a pro-life event one time. It wasn't necessarily a Catholic singles event or anything by any stretch of the imagination. There were a lot of families there. But one of the things that I noticed was I encountered this young woman as I was paying for parking and was just kind of trying to foster a conversation, asked her name. She just wasn't really locked into the conversation. She was kind of staring off. And I ended up talking to her a little bit at the event. She was still kind of just avoiding eye contact, started talking to somebody that she recognized right away. It just was very, very difficult for me entering into that conversation. So I ended up seeing, all right, let me try to meet somebody else and just have a conversation, just meet somebody new tonight. Started talking to another woman who was there. She was working the event, but she was just like single-minded. I'm going to go do my work here and not having any conversation. I go sit down at a table, and I'm talking to a couple of guys, and I look over to my right. There's a table full of like 8 women at this table. And I don't know if they're there to, meet anybody or just experience the event, but it was a pro-life fundraiser. So it's understandable if they're just there to experience the event. But as a single man, it's like, well, okay, that's not super approachable. And as I went through the event itself, there just wasn't all this approachability in terms of meeting somebody new. So it was just easy for me to go and talk to some of my friends. So I think that's one of the first lessons that I've learned and want to communicate to women. What do you think? What's coming to you, Arleen?
Yeah, that's really good. And I love that you point that out and that you have tried it, like that you've like tested it a little bit, like you've gone up to these women. And I first of all, I completely agree, like that with what your point is. I think that we as women do need to make ourselves approachable, accessible, especially if we're interested. It may be like that, if you're not open to dating, like get off the app, like, and I'm saying that figuratively at this point, like don't entertain it. And maybe don't make eye contact, and maybe, close yourself off in that way. If dating totally is not an option for you.
Yes.
But if you are looking to meet somebody, I think that we do shoot ourselves in the foot by doing any number of things. It's really interesting that you brought up the whole group of 8 women at a table. First of all, that's awkward for everyone involved. I would not enjoy being asked out in front of an audience. And I can't imagine a guy would enjoy asking a woman out in front of an audience. And so I that's really interesting. And the first thing that came to mind when you said that for me was that maybe we should go places by ourselves more often. Like, and part of, like, I'm kind of joking, but I'm also not really joking, because I think back to certain times, like when I was writing my book. I don't know if you got to the part of the book where I talk about being in a coffee shop working on the book. And, I was, I had like the catechism and other, like a big bunch of books on my table. And this guy, sits down or whatever. Maybe I sat near him, I don't remember. And he was, he was attractive, and I was really busy, and I had a deadline for the book, but I was like, if he talks to me, I'll entertain it. And I was very approachable. Although I had books out, I was clearly like by myself, clearly frustrated with the writing process, and just kind of staring at his face every now and then. And, he took a risk and he struck up a conversation. Nothing ever came of that. But it is interesting, the difference between being, alone and available as opposed to being out with your friends, how I think the opportunities do increase for encountering guys in a situation that's like a little less intimidating, for everybody involved. Assuming you're in a safe place, not, in a dark alley at 2 a.m. in New York City or something like that, but like, so I do think there is actually something to be said of going places alone. And it doesn't have to be like a coffee shop. Like, as I've said in many things I have written and in many other podcast interviews and all over speaking, it is not wise, in my opinion, as a Catholic who wants to marry a Catholic, to pick the people you date out of a pool of all people. Because I think that the odds that you're going to find someone who adheres to the very specific countercultural tenets of our faith at a coffee shop, they're very slim. Like odds are not good. And so you want to maybe go, like you did, like go to a pro-life event, go to a Catholic young adult group, go to a Theology on Tap, and go by yourself. You don't have to necessarily go with a big group of friends. You could go with one or two friends too, but
Yes.
get yourself away from them every now and then and mingle. And I think
and I think that's a point there too that I want to speak into, going with one or two friends as opposed to going with 5 friends, or you can go with 5 friends, but breaking off into smaller groups, it just makes it easier to approach. Because I think this isn't just this one event, because I've seen this especially in the Catholic world here in Denver, where I'll go to an event and then there's groups of people. If I know somebody in that group, and I don't know everybody, I'm more likely to approach that group. But if I know nobody in that group and it's a group of 5 women, I'm much more likely to be deterred and not approach that. Whereas I think 2 women, if there's 2 women that I don't know, I'm much more likely to approach them. And then even further, if I know one of the women, I'm much more likely to approach that group as well. And the reason I bring this point up, I should provide this context, is a little bit from the women's perspective. A lot of times they've been told, hey, man needs to be the initiator, and that gets interpreted as you have no control over this. You just need a guy to approach you and ask you out. That I think a lot of it is what I've observed. And it's kind of, I was talking to my friends about this one time, like think about a dance in a ballroom or something like that. I went to a dance just last weekend, and what was interesting is just the availability of people. Because this is a place where it's expected that you're going to dance, but there's certain people who are crowded in groups, clumped in groups, women who are clumped in groups in the corner and just talking amongst each other, versus women, maybe there's 1 or 2 near the standing tables right next to the dance floor. They're much more approachable for being asked to dance. And it could just be the case that the women who are catching up with friends don't want to be asked to dance and they just want to do that. But the approachability factors is huge. So just carrying that analogy from the dance floor to dating relationships, it's the more that you make yourself available for being asked out, a lot of times that can make it easier for a man to ask out. Absolutely. Yeah. I think we are, even in the last episode, we talked a bit about, wanting, my first point was
we need you to take a risk. We need you to approach
Yes.
us. But
Right.
that is completely useless if we do not make ourselves approachable. I mean, that's just the honest truth. And
Sure. That's interesting, because I was going to say that it's just because she's unapproachable doesn't mean that you can't take a risk, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's
you
also
do need
true.
to you do need to take a risk, or figure out how to you can make things happen.
Right.
Yeah, but also take advantage of those opportunities when they are available.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's certainly a lot easier if we are approachable, I would imagine. But yeah, you are. I totally agree, and I think there is something to be said of, in a respectful way, trying to get her attention. Like if you are really interested in this person and she's got her earbuds in, be like, like whatever, but also, ladies, like, take your earbuds out, like,
Yes,
if you,
that's a good point.
You know what I mean, and
they're kind of like the ring in Lord of the Rings. They kind of make you invisible at times. People don't want to bother you when you have your headphones on.
Yeah. It's kind of like the universal sign: headphones, earbuds, whatever you have. Like if you have them in, no one's supposed to talk to you. And people do it on airplanes all the time. They're not even listening to anything. It's just they don't want to talk to the person next to them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would also encourage like airports is a really good example. Although this is also not a great example, because again, the odds that you're going to meet a practicing Catholic sitting at your gate, not great, but because we are just that few and far between. But, it's still good practice, to a degree. You just, don't, you can have a book out or whatever, but like every now and then lift your head up, look around, see who's around, make eye contact, smile at somebody, say hello.
Yes. That's right.
Just to make people aware that like you're not afraid to engage in conversation right now. And that's kind of how it starts.
Yeah, I want to pack something underneath this, because I think I just found this a common theme. As I mentioned the narrow-sightedness at the beginning, I think a lot of men don't know what women go through, and a lot of women don't know what men go through, which is why we're having this conversation to begin with. And it reminds me a little bit of a conversation that I had just a couple of weeks ago with a female friend of mine, and she had this really good conversation with a man, and was basically expecting him to ask her out. And as she laid out the situation, I just decided to ask her a little bit about the details of this. And essentially, I helped her see, all right, what are the things that need to happen for a man to ask a woman out? And one, which is a good rapport. Yes, a guy could just randomly ask a woman out and without any context, but it's usually, I think a lot of women would react in a, like, who's this creep here that's coming over?
Pretty much, yeah.
And so there's like a good rapport needs to happen, but also a one-on-one situation, because this was where my friend ran into the challenge where, there was this really good rapport built, and they were playing games, and it was over the course of a couple hours being around friends, but they weren't in a one-on-one situation where there, just as you mentioned, there was the audience. So if there's a way where she can kind of encourage him to get into a one-on-one situation, it can make it easier for him to ask her out. I think another thing, too, is his courage can grow upon her encouragement, in a sense. Like if she is responding to what he's talking about, laughing, smiling, making eye contact. I mentioned that one from that pro-life event where she just was like very distant. She wasn't engaging in the conversation whatsoever. But if she's engaged in the conversation, that is encouraging that, hey, there's a good chance that she's going to say yes. It doesn't take away the risk, because she could say no, or she could say, hey, I'm discerning religious life, which happens, and it's okay if that's the case. But I think that this came up in one of the talks or a podcast I was listening to, and how men can make the first move, being as initiators. Men can make the first move, but women can certainly send the first signal. There's that initiation in that receptivity of being able to work together that I think is oftentimes missed from women. And so I want to encourage that. I'm not saying you need to be overly flirtatious, but just simply smiling and engaging in conversations. So just learning how to have a good conversation is just the first step to being inviting for a man to ask you out.
Yeah, that's really good. I think there's a lot of pretending going on in dating. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times we know, like a man and a woman who are interested in each other kind of know, but I think whether it's an underlying fear of rejection or an underlying lack of confidence or, whatever it is, we pretend not to notice. Like a man he's not consciously pretending. It's more of a denial, I should say. But like she may be sending a signal that he's denying out of fear. Or she may not be sending any signals, but think she is. You know what I mean? Did I say that right? Yes. Like she thinks she's like, but how could he not know that I'm interested? When it's like, you're not sending any signals. And I don't mean to be harsh or offensive when I say that, like, we're all pretending. But I do want to encourage listeners to really be honest with yourself about how you've been doing this. Mm-hmm. Because I do think that there are probably, despite, again, how few and far between practicing Catholic young adults are, or at least how it feels, I think there probably are abundant opportunities, even if in small, like Theology on Tap sort of situations or whatever, there are abundant opportunities to meet good potential dates. And yet somehow we're lying to ourselves. We are either saying like, he should know that I would be okay with it if he talked to me, but we're sitting in the corner with our head down, sipping our soda and not looking around the room or not getting up and mingling.
Right.
And on the other side, for the men, it might be that maybe she is sending a signal and you're still got to work up the courage, to go up to her. And that's okay. Right. Like, you'll get there, but like, we have to just take a moment to be honest. Like, she really did just smile at you. You can go up to her and talk. Or he has no idea you exist because you keep taking the long way to the bathroom instead of walking past him. Walk past him and smile already. Like, you know what I mean?
That's right. Or going back to what we brought up, just going to the event, hanging out in your group of 5 that you always hang out with, and not actually going to meet somebody new. Yeah. Those are common things that I've seen or observed. There's a comfort zone there. Mm-hmm. And that's a very natural thing, especially for people who have more introverted tendencies. Right. It's easy to be in that, and it's more comfortable. Yeah. But to actually go out and, this is part of what we talked about in the last episode about growing in virtue. Sometimes we need to put ourselves out there, but that builds for whatever the vocation that God has us for. That we become more courageous, because you have to, in marriage, for instance, you have to bring this courage into a conversation, or into marriage, in terms of how you discipline your kids or how you have crucial conversations with your spouse. Oh, yeah. So these are all the sorts of things that are coming to my mind. I mean, this is such I think such a pivotal factor for, I think, a lot of the conversations that I've had with women. One thing, actually, I'm just curious to know your thoughts on this, and I'll just let you know, I'm kind of unsure, divided about this, but I've heard a couple times where the question is posed, is it okay for women to ask men out on like a first date? And I'm just curious as to what your opinion is on that.
I'm trying to think if I've ever done that. I would say odds are probably good I have, knowing me, but nothing is popping into my head, so maybe not.
Sure.
That is tough. I don't mean to keep returning to the previous episode, but when I talked about, how we need you to take a risk when we were talking to the guys, that's somewhat rooted in an article I wrote a while ago about how women are worth the risk, and that was written to women, many of whom have a history, myself included, of like handing ourselves to a guy on a silver platter, even though he has expressed no interest whatsoever and is not all in. It may be that he's expressed some interest, but it's like the bare minimum to keep you available to him. Mm-hmm, but mm-hmm. he's not actually like stepping into the role of committing to you and wanting a relationship with you that is exclusive. And And so it's hard for me to go for it and just say, yeah, like totally go ahead and ask a guy out on a first date because of that. Because
yes.
I need to think about how to word it. I wish I had read that article before.
Oh, that's okay.
It's been a long time, but like the whole point, like if I could sum it up, I would probably say that I think for women, and in my experience, whether, particularly if it is prior to a woman's realization of her own value, which I think has to happen for every woman. I think for whatever reason, whether it's just, by virtue of being human in a fallen world, like we sometimes accept behavior from others, and this probably goes both ways. We accept what we think we're worth, right? And I don't think that's a conscious thing. I think that it is something below the surface, says, I'm never going to be able to get something better than this, so I'm going to settle for it. And I worry that if we put ourselves out there in that particular way, by just orchestrating and initiating in a way that traditionally and preferably would fall to the guy in my world.
Sure.
I fear that it just perpetuates that, like that it may be that, like, because, the opportunity presents itself, even though he's not excited about her. Like I've put it this way before, like no woman wants to be able to look back while she's married and say, man, to her husband, remember how lukewarm you were about me when we dated? Like nobody wants that. Like, and yet there are many situations where we as women, and maybe it happens to men too, but I have found that a lot of women end up in these relationships with men who are lukewarm about them. Totally lukewarm.
Yeah. And
it's because the women just like kind of persistently pestered them into dating.
Yes. Yes. Right.
And I just don't think that has the same quality that it should have or could have. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I've been kind of thinking about this, and I'm also like a bit divided on this. I think a couple of different places, a couple of married women speakers have given this permission of, yes, you can, but with the qualification of, hey, if you go out on a date, you should pay and not expect him. It would be rude to expect him to have to pay.
Will you take me out to dinner?
Right. Exactly. I think as I've kind of thought through this a little bit, it is certainly more natural for a man to ask a woman out. And now there's certain situations where a woman could probably give a man a nudge, especially if they built a friendship and maybe she can tell that he's interested, or maybe just he may just be mixed, but he has these moments where he just seems really interested in her, to clarify. Maybe it's not even asking out, but just, hey, you seem to be showing interest in me in this particular way because I see this here and here. And I'm just kind of curious, are you wanting to pursue something more than friendship? So even just entering into that conversation, even if it isn't like, hey, I'm going to ask you out on a date, but it also could just be a coffee introduction to having a conversation. Yeah. I'm kind of divided on it. I think eventually it shouldn't be, as you were saying, I don't think a woman should be dragging a man along who's just lukewarm about her. Yes. That at some point he needs to grow into his masculinity and be the leader in the relationship. And sometimes it just may need to be something a woman prompts a man to encourage him to choose which side of the fence, yes or no.
Right.
And
exactly.
So I think, and this goes for, I think, a lot of Catholic dating rules, that it's hard to really make black and white rules of yes, always, or, there can be some exceptions, or no, never, those sorts of things, where we talked about this in the previous episode about the appropriateness of men calling or texting women to ask out on dates or asking in person, and how kind of we get the different women want different things than men are told that they should do. So I think that this is another one of those kind of gray areas where you just have to discern it. But this is all part of growing into an adult, is using your virtue of prudence and figuring out, all right, practically speaking, what does this situation call for? So I want to move on to the next point here. And next point, second is a first date is not a marriage proposal. And the thing I had to, as I was putting together my points here to share, this came up a couple of times because I asked some men, hey, what would you want women to know? And this came up several times. What's interesting is a lot of the Catholic world will say, hey, dating is about marriage. And I think what happens is we interpret that as a date is about marriage. A first date is about marriage. It's really supposed to be more, I think, dating relationships are about discerning marriage with this other person. But a first date, and I can tell from a number of the women, I don't know if it's many, but a number of the women that I've asked out on a first date, they react as if, oh shoot, he just asked me to marry him. Maybe I'm being a little bit dramatic here or exaggerating, but I think that there's a tendency to just think, oh, he just asked me out on a date and he's serious. He's like infatuated with me. And then it gets to the point of rejection, which we're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. But that sort of thing where, oh, if he's super serious about me, then it's going to be hard to turn him down later. And that's something that I've encountered just with kind of discerning through certain things. I asked a married couple before this episode, just kind of their experience and just kind of, hey, did you know on going into date one that you were going to marry this person? And they said no. And she even had said, coming after date one, she was like, yeah, I'm confident there's going to be a date number 2, but I don't think it's going to go beyond that. And he sent her this like message, this video message of him being like a hologram image on the Millennium Falcon for Star Wars fans. And it was just like this really cheesy way. And she's like, oh, I'm unsure. But they ended up going on a second date and it ended up getting married. So
oh my goodness.
It's just, it's these funny things that happen. But I used that story just to illustrate, even if you don't think you're going to marry him when he asks you out for the first time or marry him after the first date, there's patience. It's a step-by-step process here.
Yeah. It's really interesting to think through this point because it could go like one of two ways. Like there's the woman who needs to be reminded it's not a marriage proposal because she's hesitant.
Yes.
So she's like, I don't think I should go. But it's not a marriage proposal. You can go on this date with this guy. You're not being held to anything. You don't have to, all you have to do is show up and drink your coffee or eat your food. Like you don't, it's not, you're not going to be required to move on with him if you don't like him. And then on the other side of that spectrum is the woman who goes on the first date and is like all in immediately, so excited, and then like doesn't hear from him for a week, and she's like, "What happened? What did I do?"
Yeah, she's freaking out.
You know what I mean? Like, so that
Yes.
it's like one of two extremes here. And I think it is really good advice to remember that it is not a marriage proposal. And
I'd add in there too for men as well to remember a first date's not a marriage proposal, because I think this works for men as well, where there can be so much anxiety about even asking a woman out for the first time, and because it's it's got to be right. It's just got to be right, or I'm divided. I'm uncertain even if I would want to marry her. Well, we're kind of thinking a little bit too far ahead here, and I think with this too is somebody once shared this piece of advice with me, and it was, hey, all you need to know after the first date is really if you're going to, if you want a second date. That's the only question. You shouldn't be asking yourself, are you going to marry her? And same thing, I think, with the first date is just, are you interested in going on a first date with her? Don't worry about the other stuff. That stuff can come, but just remember where you are and live in reality.
yes, oh my gosh, yes, please stay in reality. And the other thing, that I think is important to note is that just because you don't feel a spark on date 1 doesn't mean you shouldn't go on date 2. I'm going to forever keep bringing that up.
Check out our last episode on,
yes, like, guys,
on the spark.
Please, I'm begging you. Don't do that to each other. And it is interesting, like, because people have asked, like, how do you know, like, whether to go on the second date? And, like, well, like, did you have a good time on the first one? Right? Like,
yes, right.
I mean, it is entirely possible that you will run into a deal breaker on date 1. I have. I met a guy online 3-4 years ago. I was living in Virginia. He drove from North Carolina to Virginia. I lived like close to the border. It was on like an hour drive, but he drove from one state to another just to meet me. And we met at a coffee shop. Within the first 5 minutes of the date, he told me, a chastity speaker and writer, that he will never save sex for marriage. The entire date turned into a debate about whether we should save sex for marriage, generally speaking. I never spoke to him again. So sometimes it's very easy to tell, no, there should not be a second date, you know. But other times it's a little more ambiguous. It's a little hard to tell. It might be that you enjoyed yourself. You had a great conversation, but you're like, I don't know, he's not like physically my type, or who cares? Has your type worked out for you yet? No, like, so maybe you need to break out of that mold and try something else, you know?
Yeah. Well, you bring up that uncertainty, I just remember a story of a friend of mine who he was talking about a date or several dates he went on, and the woman was like, yeah, you know, I'm just unsure. I don't want to lead you on. But I think that uncertainty is the opportunity to continue to go out. If it's debilitating, then you may just need to put it on pause. But that's the whole point of going out on dates, is like, it's a discernment. It's being able to navigate, hey, is this person right? And if it continues to come up for you as, okay, yeah, I just don't think that this is the right person, that's when you're able to say no. And that I think is a just a helpful piece of, as long as you're not feeling unsafe, it's okay to continue to go out and get to know, because that's all part of this. There's uncertainty in life. And what I found just as a coach and in my own life is that we overcome uncertainty by taking steps forward rather than putting things on hold.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I think, we do kind of grasp at some sort of certainty. And like, I think if there's anything I've learned in this past year, which has like been one of the hardest years of my entire life, it is that we are not in control, and that we cannot be certain about most anything. Mm-hmm. And I think we do ourselves and other people a disservice when we aim for something like certainty in that context. And
yes,
when we fear,
especially early on.
Yes, and when we fear uncertainty so much. Yep. I think we really do in every part of life just have to get a little bit more comfortable with uncertainty, and the only way to get comfortable with something is to spend more time with it, you know. And so maybe it is, you know. And I also want to say, like, I think in some of my experiences, some of my better dating experiences, and again, like from the first episode you mentioned in a part of my book where I talk about, like, you know, a relationship doesn't have to end with marriage for you to consider it a success. Like, yes, I've had many successful relationships that have ended with terrible breakups, but they're still successful because we did the job of discerning whether we should do this, and we discerned that we should not. Mm-hmm. But there's one in particular that I'm thinking of where I did feel a lot of that uncertainty about a guy, and it was like kind of like date one. It was like, you know, like I didn't really, like, it was okay, you know. It wasn't so bad that I wouldn't go on a date two, but I also was like, I don't think this is gonna be good. And I was probably the first time in a long time, I decided to kind of go for just the more like blunt, bold, I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm thinking, even though I don't hardly know you. And I told him, I said, yeah, I'm not really sure if I'm interested in you, but I would go on a second date. And he was like, okay, that's good for me. And so we went on a second date, and the second date my plan was to tell him when I got to the date, I was like, okay, this is gonna be our last date. I didn't tell him this, but I was thinking, like, I had this whole little speech rehearsed, and we eat lunch, and I run to the restroom, and I'm in the restroom, and I'm like, my speech isn't good anymore because I had a really good time. Like, I was like, now I have to come up with a new speech because I'm still not sure, but I'm not sure. Like, so I ended up, again, it was just like this, I just was like, you know what? I'm just going to try this as an experiment because I had never done it like this before. And I was just like, again, still not really sure about you, but I would like to go on a third date. And we went on the third date, and then we never saw each other again. But yes. It was still, like, it was a good exercise in, like, being open and honest about the uncertainty so that there's, like, no surprises. Like, you know, I think there's something good about being open and honest about it. But, like, just tell each other how you're feeling. Give each other an update, you know. And we can't read each other's minds or know what's going on in each other's hearts. And I think in any dating relationship, whether you're just going on dates or you're in a committed thing, I think we need to get into the habit of unveiling what's happening in here and what's in our heads and what's happening in our hearts more often, because people just guess otherwise, and most of the time we guess wrong, you know? So.
And there's something definitely to that, and I admire you for just laying it out there and just being honest with where you are with this particular gentleman, just because I've been on the other side of that where she wasn't saying things, and also me just kind of being in dream world, not really picking up on the signs, getting to a point where, hey, I thought she was interested, and then all of a sudden, hey, I get a text, hey, I want to just call you about something, I want to honor you by calling you over the phone, and I'm like, I know exactly what this means.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's pretty evident.
It just, there was nothing leading up to that point of, hey, I'm unsure about this, and it's almost like I'd want to talk about it, because then one, I could be prepared, but two, also I could talk with her and journey with her through that. And that's also something too, as it's training for marriage, being able to say, hey, this is what I'm going through, this is how I'm feeling, and being able to enter into a difficult conversation like that. Anyway, moving on, this kind of ties into where the conversation was going about the previous point and being unsure in everything. Point 3 for things men want women to know is you are encouraged to say yes. We encourage you to say yes, but also feel the freedom to say no, even to a first date. I want to just express that because I know that I've been on dates where I can just tell she's just not interested, and it's a drag of an hour and a half, and not that it's a waste of time entirely, but if she's made her decision already, then it's, and especially for men usually paying for the date, and I guess this is just a side comment to men, make the first date very simple, make it, you know, coffee or drinks or something just simple, just because of this. But encountering these sorts of situations where it's like, yes, we're in this context of a date, but I can tell that she's hesitant, she's holding back. That's just one piece of advice that I've kind of learned. This is different, and I want to make this clear because especially if people are in their early 20s who are listening to this, I do want to encourage you, especially as you're getting started early on, to go on dates, even if you may not be interested, just because you can learn from those. But as you've gone on and you've been in the dating world, you may not necessarily need to learn those sorts of lessons. And especially if you know for sure, I've already thought about this with this guy, I don't see it working out. I'm okay giving women the freedom to say no to that. And I want to talk about rejection in a second, but just what are your thoughts on that?
So, yeah, like as I was hearing you and imagining you sitting at this table with a woman who is acting as if she has no interest in being there, I could only imagine what would go through your head and what would go through my head. Like if the situation were reversed, I would be like, why are you here? Why are we here? Why are we doing this?
When's this going to end? When's this going to be over?
Yeah, right?
Is there another 4 hours he has planned?
Yes.
Because sometimes that's what happens.
We've all been there. But I also was thinking about one of the more recent articles I wrote for Catholic Match about why you should go on a second date. And it's somewhat relevant because I don't doubt that you have the ability to discern, and we all do, I think, have the ability to tell when someone across the table is not interested. But I also think sometimes there might be other reasons that on a first date where like this person's not interested, but it might not be true. It could be just like a shyness or a nervousness. It could be she could have had a really bad day. Yeah.
Yep.
She could be hormonal. There could be, I'm just being honest, that happens. Like, you know, we do have different moods, and sometimes you catch us on the wrong day. It could be any number of things. And what I encourage people to do is, rather than write this person off, and this goes for women and men, remember that first impressions are not always right. And if it is within the realm of possibility that, let me rephrase that. If you were wrong about other people you've dated, people you loved on date one, it is within the realm of possibility that you are wrong on date one about people who kind of bore you.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
Like, so you have to, I think, open yourself up to the possibility that just because it was boring or the person didn't talk a whole lot, that does not mean that's really who that person is. There are a lot of factors. I mean, I find first dates to be nerve-wracking, especially if I haven't met the person in real life yet. You know, I've been on first dates with people I initially met face-to-face out in public or at a church or whatever. And then I've been on first dates with people I met online. And the online ones particularly are different for me because I don't know. I've seen pictures of this person, but I don't know how this person carries himself. I don't know, you know, I don't know how tall he is. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know anything. And so everything is a surprise. Right. And so sometimes you go in just like so nervous that you cannot be yourself. Right. Like you can't. And then hopefully, ideally, you begin to relax once you get a feel for the context of who this physical person is. It's not just a profile. This is a real person, and you can now engage with them in real time. I feel like we just need to, you know, open ourselves to the possibility that maybe some of those reasons aren't good reasons to say no to a second date, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think about this. So the reason I phrased it is we encourage you to say yes, but feel the freedom to say no is, I think for the most part, it's probably a good idea to try one or two, at least 2 dates. But in a sense, especially if you've gotten to know somebody, it's okay to say no. And even to a first date, if you've like been around them, especially if you like work with them or something like that, and you've gotten a good clear picture of them, just because I think about and not just from my own experience within this, but a lot of the and this isn't wrong, but a lot of the advice has been, hey, the guy honored you by asking you out, so you should honor him by saying yes. And so I'm even thinking first date. It's those I think are good sentiments. And again, going back to early 20s or getting started in dating, it's good for both of you to have that experience of asking out, going out, even if it's not going to work out. But I want to give people permission to say no if they just like, could just not be the right time, or it could just be, hey, yeah, I just don't see us in this particular way. There's no harm in going out on a first date unless it's unsafe, and so I just want to qualify that. But I want to give women especially the permission to say no. And when it comes to that point of rejection, what I know that you're in a certain sense triggered when a guy says, "Hey, I just don't feel the spark." I think I'm triggered in a way when a woman turns me down after a first or second date, and it's just like, "Yeah, you're a great guy, but I'm just not interested." It's the great guy speech is what I call it. And I think when it comes to rejection, number one is just the mentality of entering into this. Rejection is a normal part of dating for men and for women. And it's actually an abnormal thing, maybe not abnormal in the sense of the word, but it's an unusual thing for a relationship to work out. And we forget that.
Right.
Going back to movies, TV shows, seeing our college friends, especially when they just marry the first person that they dated,
right.
we forget that rejection's a normal thing. So both men and women, this is an important lesson for. And I think specifically for this topic, speaking to women, of rejection's a normal thing. And so when you're rejecting somebody, I have known a lot of women where, one of the more recent dates, one of the women was saying, it's just, I appreciate you receiving this well of not wanting to go out again, because there's certain men where it's just like it crushes their dreams, and I can just tell.
Yeah.
And in that just going back to rejection, this is a normal part of dating, that how to do it, how to do rejection is, I want to encourage you not to do the great guy speech, but to think about, all right, what are the qualities or characteristics that you really did appreciate about him? And then giving him that feedback, whether it is a virtue thing or you just don't see it working out of, hey, I appreciated how courageous and how straightforward you were about asking me out on this date. At the same time, I just don't see things moving forward. That's a totally fine way to leave it. But if you're affirming something specific in his character, it's something he's going to be able to receive very well.
That's really good, and actually something I needed to hear personally, because I think I have gone a little heavy on the feedback.
Yes.
The negative feedback, without also sharing in the moment what I appreciated about the guy. And so I think that's really wise, and I think I now have some regrets, but it's fine. But the other thing that I wanted to bring up in terms of rejection, it's a little off topic, but I feel like it's really worth bringing up. My mom is a therapist, and she used this on me in the past and told me she uses this with clients. And I don't remember, I must have been in my 20s at the time probably, but I think a relationship had ended, and she was like, let's just say I was 25. She says, you lived without that guy for 25 years. I think you'll be fine. And I thought that was so good, because it is true. Like you might, you meet somebody, you go on a couple of dates, and then there's a rejection on either end. And there's like this devastation sometimes, just this absolute devastation. And it's like, you were fine for the 33 years that led up to this moment. Mm-hmm. Before you met that person. They were not in your life. You can live without that person.
Yes,
you can. You've done it, and you're going to do it again. Like, you're going to be fine. And I think, and that's not to dismiss the feelings of grief that are real, very real after a relationship ends. I don't need to make light of that. I know that those are real, and I have lived them myself. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, sometimes we have to look at what causes that. And I think when we make this person and this relationship with this person into our source of peace, into our source of joy, into our life entirely, when we lose it, it will be devastating. And we were never meant to make people the source of those things. And so that's God is the source of those things. And I think until we can approach relationships with that in mind, even some of those short-lived relationships that end and cause us devastation, they won't cause that kind of devastation anymore, because we know we can move on, and we haven't put all of our hopes into this one relationship.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And remembering, once again, the most important thing is our relationship with God. And one of the things that you wrote in your book and about how dating relationships, the only successful one, it's not marriage. You can have successful relationships or dating relationships that don't end in marriage because you learn something from them. God wants to speak to you.
Learn from them. Exactly.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I think you put it well. It was like that whether we end up married or not, we're all learning how to love. Mm-hmm. And all of these sorts of things lead us to learn how to love in a self-sacrificial way, in a way that the Lord does for us. So with that, I do want to also make this distinction too, of turning somebody down after a couple of dates, and turning somebody down after either a series of dates or in a relationship, to avoid, if it is a longer term thing, not to cold turkey it, but to actually communicate. I mean, yes. I know we talked about that a little bit before, but just being able to learn how to communicate those what's going on internally is just so important. So I feel like that's something to reiterate. But anyway, we gotta wrap up here. Yeah. And I these conversations just breezed by. I can't believe how long they've gone.
I know. I just looked at the time and I was like, well, we did it again.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so much for 35 minutes. Here we are. Hopefully listeners didn't get bored, but I do want to invite our listeners to engage in the conversation. So, men, did we miss something? What thing would you want women to know about dating? And in particular, I want to, of course, encourage you to respond charitably, because that's so important. You don't have somebody in front of you. It's easier to respond in a very curt way. So online. So I just want to encourage the charity in the comments there. But final questions is just thank you, Arleen, so much for joining us here. How can our listeners follow you?
Oh my goodness. I'm on Instagram and Facebook mostly, at Arleen Spenceley. It'll be spelled on some sort of screen.
And we'll put it in the show notes too.
Perfect. Thank you. I am also on Twitter, but I rarely tweet, also at Arleen Spenceley. And my website, arleenspenceley.com. I have not been actively blogging there, but I do have a Substack, which you can find if you... I don't know how to find my Substack. Probably.
Well, it'll be in the show notes, because Arleen will send me how to find the Substack, and then you can
I will send you a link. I'm going to I plan in 2023 to really start regularly writing again. 2022 was, as I said, a really hard year, so I have not been doing a lot of writing, but hope to get back into it. So that's where I'll do it, is at Substack.
Oh, wonderful. All right, awesome. And final question I ask all my guests here is, what does it mean to you to live a God-inspired life?
So I sat here with this question when I first read it and dwelled for a minute, and the first thing that came to me, to live a God-inspired life is to remain aware by any means necessary that God is good and that He is with you. I think that if you can remember those two things, you will feel safe, you will feel secure, and you will feel valued. And if you feel those things, I mean, that just changes everything. It changes how you date. It changes how you feel when you get rejected. It changes... it changes how courageous you are able to be when you are approaching someone that you want to ask out. It just changes everything. For sure.
Yeah, beautiful. That security in God, knowing that He's the unchanging thing in our lives. So thank you once again so much for joining us here. And yeah, I encourage everybody to follow Arleen, and also check out her book too. We'll leave that in the show notes as well. So with that, everybody live inspired, live God inspired.